Welcome to our video. Today we are going to talk about teacher agency and inclusion. And we are a group of teachers, of activists and researchers, and we decided to focus on this topic here at All Means All. We are going to address and to try to find answers to 5 questions, in particular, what is teacher agency? Why it does matter for inclusion? Which are the elements that are constituting teacher agency? And also, we will also try to understand how teacher professional development support teacher agency. At the very end, we are also trying to give you some insight on how to enhance teacher agency. Before we start into getting more into our topic, I would like to add that we are using a broader view on inclusive education. So we are not referring specifically to only learners and children with disabilities, but to every type of learner. So now, to understand what is teacher agency, I give the floor to Rihanna.
So teacher agency is a really difficult concept to define because there's many definitions and perspectives out there. When we refer to teacher agency here, we're not referring to a company or a supply teachers, but actually things like the actions of teachers. For example, if a teacher makes a decision to teach about ancient Egyptians in their classroom, we are looking at those decisions and also how they've come to those decisions. So it might be that it's a result that they have to teach ancient Egyptians because it's part of their curriculum, or it might be because they've identified it's an interest of their learners. So really importantly, teacher agency is hard to define because it's not always clear or visible what it is. We've taken an ecological perspective, which means that we're looking at agency as something that's achieved within teachers' current situations. So in other words, it's not just only looking at it as a capacity, but it's also looking at teachers' experiences, teachers' knowledge, resources, the structure that they work within, relationships, the aspirations they have as well. We're now going to move on to look at why teacher agency matters for inclusion. So I'm going to pass to Madhu.
So the idea of teacher agency is something which is best thought of from the point of view of a teacher, because teachers understand their context the best. Teachers understand the diversity in the given classroom, and therefore, as inclusive education is defined as a response to exclusion, teachers are able to understand the various kinds of exclusion that may exist in a given environment. So teacher agency is something that teachers can enact, given that they know the exclusion that takes place. I'd also want to invite Tamara to respond to this.
Yeah, so I think you're right that teachers are indeed in the best position to identify the needs of their learners. And I think from this idea, they can actually try to form a community of teachers where they try to initiate change from their own perspective and experiences that they have with their learners. And by engaging in this community and trying to enact change in this manner, you can also see that teachers in this way will engage in professional development. So they will learn more about their own views and about their own abilities when they can enact this agency in their community. It also means that there's a role for the school as a whole to provide space for this and to provide room for discussions and sharing the visions together. So I think that there's not only a role for the teachers, but also for the school as a whole. What do you think about that, Madhu?
Yeah, schools are changing across the world. The diversity of schools have changed, given that there have been various global events such as conflicts across the world, given that there is legislation that supports inclusion of children with disabilities in the classroom. And for various other reasons, the diversity of the classroom has changed from being a homogeneous to a more heterogeneous space. So it's really for schools to reflect upon this and to think about the social justice as a broader focus that will enable inclusive practice. But yeah, I would further ask you to think about it, how it means within the context of how teachers might need to be prepared for this.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying with the diversifying population, I think that's something that's very recognizable for teachers. And I think you can look at it indeed from a perspective that means that they are in the position to see what's needed for inclusion, but also for teachers it could mean more pressure on their already increasing workload in times of, for instance, shortages of teachers, increasing pressure to perform in terms of assessment. So what we do see is that teachers experience more pressure in their work, and we can see teacher agency as a way to cope with this pressure. So it might actually help the teachers to have this sense of control over what they're doing, even in times where there's a lot of pressure. And then on the other hand, agency could also help them to actually raise awareness about the issues that they're facing in their own classroom. So both from a coping perspective as well as an awareness perspective, teacher agency can be of an aid to decrease the pressure in that way. And I think what's important for us as a group is also to not place the burden on the individual teacher, but to see this as a systemic issue, that teacher agency is also something that is built from a system. And I think, that would be an interesting insight to move to now. Rihanna, can you tell us a little bit more about these elements of teacher agency?
So we're looking at teacher agency from an ecological perspective. There are many more. We've taken a model from Priestley and adapted this, and this model splits agency into 3 elements. These elements, the first one is iterational, which has a past orientation. This focuses on things like your professional development, your personal experiences, and also all your professional experience as well. And then the second element is projective evaluative, that focuses on the presence, your current context. So where you teach in your classroom, the resources you have, the relationships you have with other members, and also the structure. And the third element is projective, which has a future orientation, so that focuses on things like your aspirations and your goals for yourself and your students. And finally, it's important to understand, whilst we're using a model that splits teacher agency into 3 dimensions, that these dimensions are interrelated. For example, if a teacher has felt excluded in her childhood, this can then impact on her projective. Maybe in her classroom, she'll want to make sure the learners don't feel the same way she did. And then also this then ultimately impacts what she does present in the classroom as well.
So I'm going to talk about an example. There's a teacher by name Rebecca who works as a teacher within a special units department within a private school in India. In her approach towards inclusive education and exercising her agency has been to firstly make sure that her own classroom reflects the principles of inclusion, and she often invites teachers to come into her own classroom and give her feedback about it. The second way in which she does this is by having informal conversations on the way to school, in the school bus, with her own colleagues about how is it that they work with children with disabilities or learning difficulties. And thirdly, her approach has also been to provide gentle nudges to the school management to consider a more inclusive practice by inviting guest speakers who can talk about inclusive education, or simply by doing a survey where the awareness about inclusive education has become apparent to the school. And she was able to do all of this also given that she was a parent volunteer before. So she had a ringside view of the school from the beginning, and it has enabled her to be quite agentic in her actions, given that she understood the school structure very well. I must also add that within the school that Rebecca works, the school segregates its children into different abilities of achievement as well as disabilities. So she inherently works at a segregated space, and she's promoting inclusion in that very space. So I would like to invite the group to analyze this example using the Priestley's model.
Thank you. So I will start off. So the iterational model, or the iterational element of the model of Priestley, shows us that for this teacher, her personal and professional experiences might play a role. And with regard to the personal experience, you can see that this is a mother of a child with a disability. So from her personal experience, this teacher knows the child perspective. She knows the issues and the struggles that the child may have. And she also, as a mother of this child, knows or maybe has some ideas about what may help or what may not help in facing these issues and struggles. And then she also has an experience as a teacher. So she knows as a teacher what children with disabilities may need, and she has her own experiences in her own professional development as a teacher. And then if we look at the professional experiences, we can see that this teacher knows the school and she knows the children that visit the school. She also knows the structure of the school, so she will know the people in the school as well as what is happening within the school and the culture of the school. So this means that in that way, she can enact on those experiences that she has. Then what we also see in the example is that she has a training on inclusion. So this means that she has developed a vision about inclusion, that she has some insights about inclusion, and that maybe she has some arguments that will help her to explain what is needed in terms of working towards a more inclusive education. And this will tap into what she can now do in the present. So I would like to now invite my colleague to tell more about the practical evaluative element of this example.
Thank you, Madhu and Tamara, for this example. Coming now to the practical evaluative part of the model, I will try to analyze it through the lens of the Priestley's model. In particular, this one, the practical evaluative, which is referred to the structures, the cultures, and the materials condition in which teachers are working in. In the Rebecca examples, from a structural point of view, we have seen that she was able to meet children's needs, even if her school was not an inclusive one. And she was also aware of the importance of the collaboration with her colleagues. That's why she was trying her best to improve her practices and to share ideas with the colleagues, using the time, for example, that she has on the bus going home, and this could really make a difference for including education. Considering the cultural aspects, and she was also able to engage together with the school principal, convincing him somehow to the importance also to make the school culture more inclusive oriented. And she was able also to organize professional development courses also offered to her colleagues. And she was also able to collect data on her school too. And we can drive from this example that every teacher can really make a difference and have also an impact on school culture and practices. But now I give the floor to the others to continue on the third part of our model.
Thank you, Sarah. So the third part, the last step of the model, the Priestley's model, refers to this projective element of agency. And it is actually, as Tamara mentioned, it has something to do with these visions, these aspirations, hopes of the teacher for themselves, and of course the students and the learners as well. So using Madhu's case, we can make sense of this model in a clear way. So for example, Rebecca's vision for an unsegregated school, vision for or aspirations for a much more inclusive classroom shapes her agency to take action, do something about it, gather people around. So these reshapes her understanding of the issues and, of course, her course of action. In addition, of course, her inclusive education philosophy is also at play here, shaping her hopes, dreams, aspirations, again, for her classroom and her own child as well, of course. So we would argue that this projection and aspiration to make the world a better place, more inclusive place, is actually what matters in this element. So a projection of a better future actually reshapes our agency, the understanding of agency. I would like to pass on to Tamara so that she can explain a little bit how does professional development support teacher agency.
Thank you. So if we look at how professional development can support teacher agency, we can look at it from 4 levels. So we can look at the teacher education, we can look at the early career, we can look at the communities of practice, and we can look at the reflexivity. So first off, with regard to the teacher education, there's a chance that teacher educators actually have here to make room for exploring values, to make sure that student teachers have this space where they can explore their values and reflect on what they are doing in their internships and in the curriculum, so that there is a time to actually learn and reflect on what it is that you're doing, which can actually inform this projective element, as well as the iterational element that we have seen in teacher agency. Then, of course, when you are still in teacher education, you may also depend on your supervisors or your lecturers. So there is this dependency that you do have, which might make it feel like it's very difficult to actually achieve agency. But what we do see is that the students can relate personal goals to the content of the curriculum. In this way, seeing the value of the assignments that they may have and actually seeing how their own values may be reflected in those assignments. So you can shape the assignments to align with your own personal goals and values. Moreover, if you are in a teacher education curriculum where you also have an internship, it could be helpful to realize that as a new teacher and as a teacher during an internship, you bring a new perspective into the school that might be very important for the school to know more about. So in this way, you not only have something to learn during your internship, as in you have something to learn from the others, but you also have something to bring into the school. And you can see this in an individual manner, where you try to shape your own classroom environment. But you may also see this as something that you can bring to your colleagues. In this way, maybe forming a collective of these first steps towards change in your school based on the insights that you have as a new teacher. And so, for instance, one example that I've seen as a teacher educator was a student who used her internship to get more perspective on the pupils that she was dealing with in her classroom. So she was looking at what are the learning needs of each of my learners in the classroom. And she made, based on those preferences, she made a seating plan for the classroom where the students who would need who would be easily distracted would be more in the front of the classroom, where they would have less sensory activation. And then the students who would maybe not respond well to eye contact would be further away from the teacher so that they wouldn't have to deal with the eye contact. And then students who would need more attention or encouragement, she would place them in her walking route so that while she was walking through the classroom, she could encourage or make sure that the learners were actually focusing on their work. So this was an experiment, and the time that she had in teacher education actually helped her to experiment with this and to experiment with how her agency could provide a more inclusive classroom experience for her pupils. So I think this is something that she can bring into her career, and I think this might be a good moment to actually look at what can early career teachers also do. So Rihanna, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can, and I'm going to reflect on more of my personal experience as well within this. So the research shows to us that early career teachers tend to have less agency, and this could be partly due to having less knowledge and less confidence within the classroom. So early career teachers should focus on building on that. So personally, when I started teaching, I was encouraged to go into other classrooms, and my school set up a structure where that was available. We got to choose every month a teacher to go and visit, and we would spend the afternoon in the classroom just looking at what they actually do, what the children do, what activities were available, what resources were being used. And whilst it wasn't directly giving me agency, it was giving me knowledge and ideas that I could transfer into my classroom practice, and knowing what else was out there instead of just using what I know. I was learning from other teachers, which is a perfect point to move on to the communities of practice.
Thank you, Rihanna. Communities of practice are groups of people who share an aim, share a value, have a similar set of problems, and that work on this problem or on these issues on an ongoing basis. And the communities of practice have this interaction with teacher agency in different manners, different processes. First of all, the communities inherently bring diverse views, diverse approaches together via people. So creating a community that collaborates actually means that the inclusion of different views, different ideas, different perspectives on the issues as well. So it is an inherent aspect of communities of practice to address this diversity. And this also has a lot to do with diversity and inclusion in the classroom. So another point would be that communities of practice also provide an area for teachers to share this leadership of the community among themselves, and this creates this sense of agency in them, and so that they may take on much more responsibility, take on much more roles in their classroom, and feel much more comfortable, doing some activities or collaborating with other individuals. Another point would be, of course, collaboration, because communities of practice are a group of people who deal with a set of similar issues. So they create this effective collaboration inside the community and this solidarity among the members. So teamwork is at the core here. And also, they may also, as a group, critically reflect on their own practices, and this has a lot to do with the reflexivity of the teacher agency. Another point would be that, of course, professional development, as we talked a little bit on in the teacher education and early career part, that these communities offer a range of subject and a skill set amongst themselves, so they can just share their experiences, strategies, or like their expertise among themselves, so that they have this continuous process of development among the group. Another would be, of course, a resource sharing. In a group of individuals, you bring a lot of tangible capital, a lot of resources from different perspectives together. So you also, by supporting and enhancing, fostering inclusion, you also bring much more resources that the individual can access. I have an example just to clarify the effect of community of practice on the teacher agency. In our organization in Turkey, named Teachers Network, what we did inside the community was that a group of teachers came together with this idea of creating much more inclusive classrooms, and they wanted to work together on an issue like this. And they formed this group of individuals where they share ideas and their problems together. So we designed a process with them together and try to find ways for them to work on this issue by interacting with experts, by interacting with inclusive education experts, and also educators themselves too. So during this time, we provided them space and agency to observe themselves and their classrooms, take notes, diaries, and through weekly community meetings, they developed new strategies. So through their work, they found their own exclusionary practices, they detected them, and developed new strategies together and find a way to implement them in their own classrooms. And through group reflection, we actually could follow the path, the learning path of these individuals on how they made their classrooms much more inclusive. And after that, they produced some materials and guides for other teachers to also learn from this experience and widen their impact, of course. So what sets a community apart in terms of the professional development is that the community of practice does not necessarily seek the transformation of an organization per se. It actually achieves a transformative effort through the vehicle of local learning, group collaboration, focusing on the practice itself, and giving the practitioners of a space of agency, voice, and identity. So we think that there is few more powerful ways to inspire people than this. And I would like my colleague Sarah to reflect on the reflexivity part of this issue as well.
Thank you very much, Gunalp. And what we can say about reflexivity, we realized while reading and studying and deepening this issue of teacher agency and inclusion that what makes really the difference is the ability of the teacher of being reflexive. What does it mean? The research shows that it's a determinant and as well for the teacher agency, but also for the professional development in general. When I work as a researcher and I conduct action researches together with teachers, it's often said by them, I don't have the time for reflexivity. I have to run and to rush all the time, but it's an important way they can have and to enhance and to provide them also the spaces in which they can reflect on their own practice, but also together with their colleagues, as in the example of Gunalp we just heard. And why reflectivity really makes difference because they are just stopping from what they are doing. They are stepping back. They are looking at the dynamics that can be there about inequalities, about power dynamics, and through reflection it is possible for them to change the course of action. And this is a way that we found very interesting to think about teacher agency and how this could be enhanced. To conclude all this discourse, we can now pass on our last question, which is how teacher agency can be enhanced in a practical way.
So when we are talking about how can teacher agency be achieved, we have to look this as an ecological model, in an ecological model as well. As we discussed before, this shouldn't be seen as something of an individual skill, but more of an ecological concept that has a lot of interactions and a lot of interplay with other actors inside the ecosystem. So this shouldn't be seen as, teacher agency shouldn't be seen as another burden in on the teacher's shoulders, another workload, another thing to complete. But instead, we should highlight the ecosystem itself and its actors while dealing with this question. So, of course, in this system, this ecosystem, living ecosystem, teachers are the core actors. This is, of course, something that we agree on. And their engagement is what drives this teacher agency inside the whole ecosystem. However, like a rock thrown into a pond, there are layers and layers of other actors, other stakeholders inside this whole system that has something to do with the teacher's own agency. So beyond this individual level, beyond the teacher, of course, there are the interpersonal relationships that the teachers form with the students, learners, other teachers, colleagues, support staff, and so on. If we move one layer away, there is also the institutional domain where school policies, school leaders, leadership, and resources available to the teacher also interact with this concept of teacher agency. Another side of agency would be that the community level around the school, where families, local organizations, universities, NGOs interact constantly with the school itself and, of course, with the teacher herself. Beyond these actors, beyond this community level, there is also the whole structure of the education system as well. So the educational policies at the district, state, or national levels determine how much of an agent teacher can be. Of course, this doesn't mean that this equals to the level of teacher agency, but it has an interplay between the teacher's own self-efficacy, teacher's own acts of agency, and so on. So at the outermost level, we see the culture of the society that has something to do with the teacher's own agency. So the values of the society, the beliefs, the attitudes, both inside the school and the broader society, reshapes how teacher agency can be achieved and also how it can be understood as well. So I would like to pass on to Rihanna so that she can talk about a little bit of the individual and interpersonal relationship level inside this ecosystem.
Thank you. So I'm focusing on how the individual, how we can look at this and how we can then see it in the context of you taking actions which will enable you to achieve agency within the classroom. So for example, example from personal experience, attending professional learning courses and development courses in areas that you see as maybe not a strength but a weakness. For example, when I first started teaching art, I hadn't got a background in art. I didn't know how to support the children and what skills and the steps to take, and I attended a lot of courses on that, which enabled me to build my knowledge and skills in that area and become more confident. So that's one of the things. Another thing is building relationships with the children, finding out about their family situations, also what they like to do at home, their hobbies, and that really helps you enable, when you come to the classroom and planning your lessons, then to inform those lessons with those ideas so the children can relate to them as well. Now I'm going to pass on to Tamara.
So if we move on from the individual level to the institute level of the ecological model, or the institutional site where teacher agency can also take place, we can see that school leaders are a very important asset for teachers to achieve their teacher agency. And what school leaders can do is, first, based on autonomy, they can make sure that there is a freedom from control, so that there is no adversities or discouragement when teachers try to enact their agencies. This especially goes for early career teachers, who can be looked at from a deficiency perspective, meaning that they don't have much to offer to the school, they have only stuff to learn from the school, as I mentioned before. So it's important that school leaders realize that even these early career teachers can actually be a resource to the school, and make sure that they have the ability to enact their insights and their values within the school. So this brings me to the second element of autonomy, which is to act on your own beliefs. And what school leaders can do is to provide space and room for experimentation, and to make sure that teachers feel encouraged to enact their agency. And this means providing an openness in the school where there's room for dialogue and reflection. And then another thing that school leaders could do is to actually actively promote inclusive education, for instance, in the vision of the school, or in discussions that will happen within the school. Then next to these more ideological ways of encouraging inclusive education, it's also important to realize that there are material resources needed for teachers in enhancing the teacher agency. So think about the time and the space and the physical space that they have to work in, that will help them to feel the autonomy and freedom to enact their agency. So from this perspective, I would like to turn to the next side of teacher agency, which is the community perspective. And Sarah, can you tell us more about that one?
Sure. Thank you, Tamara. Yes, what about a network or the community? We are using both terms for this part of this layer. And what could be done to enhance teachers' agency? A possibility is to be engaged into networks, as we heard from the community of practice example. And if you are student teachers, for example, and you are studying at a university, you can be engaged in yourself in creating the community. For example, as I was studying, I was trying also always to engage other students in activities of cinema forum, cinema discussions. And I realized that when I got to the practice, I really had the possibility to use that knowledge, that it was realized in an informal context at that time. So I will really recommend you to be active in first person together with the others. So use every possibility you have. And for example, if your professor are organizing trips, be there because are really important situations in which you can also see other pedagogical approaches that maybe really help and make and make you more agentic in your in realizing also inclusion in your classroom. Then if you are a teacher and you are now a teacher, you can engage in the network. Network is understood in a broad way, so be active in your city, do something with the libraries, with the museums, and it's a way to expand your knowledge as an adult, but also to offer learning possibilities also to the kids that don't have any. Yeah, now I ask Madhu to speak about the last layer.
As Guna earlier mentioned, the various ripples that are caused by the rock into the pond, I think the cultural and the structural aspect really needs to support agency. The cultural structural aspect has to do with how society looks at teachers and the kind of importance it places in its policy towards teachers. It also means that policies need to follow a system where there isn't a hierarchical system where teachers are sought to be controlled. Rather, it should the obvious thing would be to really create a sense of freedom for teachers to not operate as people who take roles, but operate as people who form their own roles within the settings. Thirdly, I would say that teachers need to see themselves as people who not only implement policy but also are critically looking at policy and are thinking about whether policy actually is in the best interest of children and is in the best interest of inclusion. Unless teachers are critical of that, then it would be hard for them to achieve agency in the area of inclusive education. And finally, I would say that teacher agency needs to be seen as an integral part of their own profession, not as an addition. It needs to encourage a sense of collective agency amongst teachers, such as the example of Community of Practice does. So this is what I would say about the structural and cultural aspect. And as we come to the end of this video, I'd like for all of us to perhaps reflect on our final message. Perhaps Gunak can start.
So I would say community. I think nothing compares to the power of individuals in solidarity. So I think my suggestions, my last message would be that form communities, develop interpersonal relationships with the colleagues. I think 1 + 1 equals more than 2 in the community setting. Yeah. Rihanna, what about you?
I would say context. I think context has a big impact on teacher agency and understanding the context you work within and the spaces where agency can be found. Tamara?
So for me, I would say that it's important to realize that agency is also about exploration and experimenting. So it might be that everything fails and nothing seems to work. I think it's about realizing that you're a learner even when you're already a professional teacher. Experiment and try to have fun in exploring the agency that you have. And what about you, Sarah?
Yeah, there is a lot of things I would like to say, but let's choose one, which is reflection. So find a time to reflect on your practice and find the time also to connect with the colleagues, which are a resource. What about you, Madhu?
Yeah, I would agree with everyone here. I also think that there is different teachers may be motivated in different ways. Some may be motivated in a community space, some may be motivated in a very different way. So I would say finding what motivates you, finding what makes you feel inspired is perhaps important in thinking about agency.